Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have something a little different on the show today. We're here with Gwen Payne. And Gwen is well, basically, we were talking about this off camera. I was like, look, how do you want me to introduce you? And she's a life coach, but like her emphasis are on things like breath work, which we'll hopefully talk about later in the show, hypnotherapy. She's a relationship counselor, a yoga instructor, and does family constellation therapy as well, which perhaps we'll get to talk about later. It's really cool. We were talking off camera about we're both into sacred sites, and she lives in Sedona, and I'm on the Michael and Mary line, or next to Michael and Mary line here in the UK. So we have that in common, and perhaps we'll dip into that later in the show. So Gwen, welcome.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here. Yeah, I can feel the energy already between our two sites lining up. That may sound a little woo-woo to people, but I honestly just felt it in my heart. So, you know.
Well, it's not woo woo to the to my audience on Odyssey. It's positively vanilla, I think. So
Okay, good.
okay, let's start from the top. So like
Yeah.
I think one of the big issues we're facing here at the moment is there's this big problem with the gender issues. I think that
Mm,
men and women just aren't embodied in their proper energy very well. They're being triangulated against each other. And
hmm
I think men aren't being very good at being men. I think women aren't being very good at being women. I think we're being even worse at relating to each other. And I think you might have some insight on how to make that better.
Wow. Well, that's certainly a big topic to dive right into. Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. And really, the word that keeps coming to mind is trauma. So there's a lot of programming. The programming itself is trauma. But at the end of the day, I think that there is so much trauma that we're all carrying around our relationship to our gender, our relationship to the other gender, our relationship to sexuality, which, is not the same thing, but, is somewhat related um, that on the plus side, I have to say this, Richard, is that I think that the fact that there is so much more available to people around trauma,
Okay.
that this can be part of the healing. And, when I'm talking about the trauma, I'm talking about, our own childhood experiences or even adult experiences, but I'm also talking about, what's been transmitted through the lineage as well. So beliefs, fears, um, just I mean, science is now proving that stress responses from our ancestors is encoded in our DNA,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, so like a lot of people listening to this are going to be thinking like, okay, how does trauma exactly affect how I'm like a masculine man or how I like interact in a marriage or a relationship or something?
hmm Well, I mean, you can look back at the models of your mother and father, right? And
Mm.
maybe one was in the home, even if they're not, but just the attitudes, the roles that they took on, the way that they related to you, for example.
Yes.
Um, and so I'm not necessarily even talking about, the big T trauma like abuse and stuff like that, but just this is insidious, right? It's something that we might not even take so seriously if we were to think about it. But if we have an overbearing parent of some kind, that can really lead to our deep-seated beliefs about who we are as a gender, or that, the opposite gender, how they show up. And that's the kind of trauma I'm talking about, let
Yeah.
alone, incest and so on and stuff like that.
Yes, that's such a good point because it's really easy to understand. Oh yeah, like I had this incestuous relationship with my uncle or something, which does occasionally happen, or I was raped. It's like, right, I get that, but like it's not exactly clear to me that that's always the most damaging thing. Like if you have like an overbearing mother, like
hmm
sometimes that will cause more trauma, more distress, and incapacitate you as an adult more. What do you make of that?
Yeah, no, I have, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And the other thing is too is the parentification that can often happen in families where the child comes in and at a very young age starts either emotionally caretaking their one of their parents. That's very, very common. We see that in family constellations all the time. And it's so imprinted that that person has no idea how to be in relationship without taking care of others, right? And they've never known how to be in relationship other than that,
Okay, so let's
right?
unpack this. So
Yeah.
so you're saying that some kids like actually take care of their parents?
Yeah, and I can tell you that from my experience as well, I know that I was emotionally caretaking my mother. Now, can I pinpoint it? And this is what makes it so tricky. Can I pinpoint an experience where I went in and put my arm around my mother and said, there, you'll be. No, it's not that obvious at all. But the fact is that later in life, I definitely was emotionally caretaking her.
Mm.
And when that shows up later in life, you can absolutely know it didn't start there. It started way before, right? So the ways that I would please my mother to make sure that she wasn't so depressed, right? Or try to lift her up in some way. Again, this is so insidious and it's so invisible, and it's so imprinted if this is the situation that we came to in our family. So a lot of times, how this comes about is there's a breakdown in the relationship between the mother and the father, right? And so one of them may turn towards the children. We, can even call this emotional incest, where in a way they make one of the children their partner, and it may not be sexual even. So again, like you're saying, oh, incest would be obvious. We could point the finger at that. Then we understand that. And I'm not saying either is better or worse, but I'm saying, in this case, we might even feel special, right? Because we get all of the attention and love from that parent.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's a burden on us as a child. We're not meant to take that emotional burden of the parent's well-being.
Well,
That,
it's vampiric and
yeah.
it's objectifying
Mm-hmm.
because so to build on what you're saying, because I think these are really good points. Like
Mm,
a spiritually healthy person has a connection to the source, which is called
mm,
authenticity, and it's called good.
mm.
And that means that you've got a psycho spiritual energy coming in, which makes you feel okay. If you don't have that, you're spiritually drowning. And what you need is one variety of grift or another. And sometimes they can get very clever, like a
Mm-hmm.
drowning swimmer, to hold on to something so they're okay. And I would
Yeah.
define that as evil. And so when I like the term I mean, it's not a very nice idea, but the term uses like emotional incest. And like that's exactly what it's like. Like
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
spirit, these parents are spiritually unsophisticated and they're looking for their kid, but it doesn't have to be their kid, it's anyone, just to keep them afloat so they can feel okay about themselves because they can't
Mm.
do that in a good, constructive, right hand path kind of way. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a way, that's a type of narcissism
Mm.
that is passive, right? So we tend to think, or the picture is put out in the culture. A lot of times, narcissists are identified as being kind of bullies and kind of larger than life. But there is passive narcissism where somebody is always doing good and so meek, but the energy is the same. They're still sucking. Right. And, if you look at it from the family constellations perspective, often that parent isn't just not is not only not getting their needs met perhaps by their spouse or doesn't have a spouse or what have you, but they didn't get their needs met as a child, right? They
Mm.
didn't get their, taken care of, loved, nurtured, so on and so forth. And so they're still looking for those unmet needs, but now they're looking down the line towards the child. And of course, that's a terrible reversal.
Yeah, it's like that picture. Like you ever seen that picture where it's called like Saturn or Kronos eating his baby or something, and there's this ugly picture of Saturn just like biting the head off its child, which is like a literary representation of what you're talking about emotionally and spiritually here.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's completely impossible for a child to comprehend that this is wrong. It's completely impossible,
Well,
right?
we're coaches, and I think this is a rather subtle and tricky idea, and we've presumably spent a long time thinking about this, and you know,
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
it is. And again, I mean, it's so insidious because this is what somebody remembers. Oh, my mom was so loving to me. She doted on me. She was very protective of me, and I'm using the mother. It's not just mothers sometimes, but that and so hard to make that wrong, but
yeah,
something in the body knows. Something in
yeah.
the body knows, and that can. But again, come back to your initial question. Then what can that lead to? That can lead to an unconscious fear of being suffocated by if that was a boy by the feminine, right?
That
So
makes a
many.
lot of sense. That makes an absolute lot of sense. So I guess like
Mhm.
so a man might feel like when they're getting close, they're thinking, "Gosh, it's going to happen again. Something bad that I can't articulate is going to happen. I can't open up." Right?
Right.
Okay.
And then of course projecting all of that into the present day, not really looking at this past relationship experience
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
on. That's why it's, you and I have a lot of different things that we work with, the different modalities that we work with. And that's why with a client, I would come to them with a lot of different angles, the family constellation angle, because when I do family constellations, I work with objects. And so you and I are talking about concepts and, with a client, we'll talk, but sometimes having the visual of the display of objects and the way that they're constellated, the visual will land concepts home deeper,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, and then if, of course, people are doing group constellations, then there's the somatic experience that, has its own beauty to it and depth.
No, I get that. And like this is one of the cool things about being a life coach that I think no other variety of therapist has, right? Like, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
like Paracelsus like broke this down eventually. He said, look, you need things for like the physical, you need things for the surface of the psyche, you need spiritual things for
Mm-hmm.
the deeper spiritual problems. And like there was
Mm-hmm.
four categories that he had. But I think it's more than that. I think like, I mean, you mentioned like different things with social there and like theoretical things and that kind of thing. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
really cool opportunities about being life coaches is like you might know about like EMF shielding. If someone's got
Mm-hmm.
EMF exposure and that's their problem, you might know about family constellation. If it's like, well, there's this relationship that's gone down, or like
Mm-hmm.
your thinking's crap. So let's look at some like cognitive behavioral therapy, or like, or 20, or like you're fat, go do a fast, like, so let's talk about cleansing and fasts, and it's like I think a really good coach like has to have different toolkits in all these different domains and then have the discernment and the wisdom to know when to use which, right?
Yeah. And so the other piece, to that is one thing you didn't mention is erotic energy, right? And this is why I became an intimacy coach. And I'm not just a relationship coach, I'm an intimacy coach, which encompasses emotional intimacy as well. It's not just sexual intimacy, because a lot of people in our culture think of intimacy as something obviously sexual, and that's one part of it. But the reason I became an intimacy coach is a few years ago, after I'd been a coach for many, many years, I somebody, I asked somebody what they did for a living, and they said, I'm an erotic blueprints coach. I thought, what on earth is that? And they told me a little bit about it. And they said, oh, here's this quiz. You should go home and take it. When they were talking to me about it, something in me just lit up. I mean, they told me the bare minimum, but there was something that all I was ready to hear, because it was like a lightning bolt that went through me. And I raced home
Mhm.
and took the quiz. And it was quite elucidating, the result of the quiz, but you know, it was more just this resonance in me. I thought, how have I been coaching people for all these years without incorporating this massive part of who we are, which is erotic energy that doesn't have to just be lumped into sex, right? This is a part of who we are. The life force, sexual energy is life force energy. And, because of the culture taboo, somehow I was coaching people in just about every facet of their life, except for this one. It was you know, the quintessential elephant in the room. And so that's why I dove in deep kind of later in my coaching life to this whole intimacy piece.
Well, okay, let's dive into to erotic energy because I think there's a lot you can teach me about this. So
Okay.
so where I've got on my path on this one is like I've learned that sublimating it is very, very, very powerful for a whole bunch of practical and spiritual
Mm,
things. It
mm-hmm.
works really good. But I've also come to the understanding that it's not the be all and end all. And I've also realized that like if you're unbalanced, um, and that energy goes into one kind of like side of it, then like things get really squirrely. And like so in my own journey, that's kind of where I am. There. Are you into Kabbalah at all? By the way, I don't know if you're in the.
I mean, I think it sounds great, but I really don't know much about it, to be
Oh, okay,
honest.
okay. Well, there's a good
Yeah.
metaphor. But the point
Yeah.
is, like, if I like, so that's what I've realized. You can sublimate it. It's really powerful, but it's not just about sublimating it. There's more you can do with it. So I wonder, like, what would you say to someone like me that's got that far with the journey but needs to know more?
Well, first, my first curiosity is what does sublimating it look like to you? Like, what can you break that down for me? Because that's my curiosity.
Yeah, so it means like no porn, no masturbation, like stay on the discipline and that kind of thing. And then what happens
Mm-hmm.
is like your training gets good, your polarity, with the opposite sex gets really good, like your creativity gets good. There's just this zest, and if you get a bit more spiritual, the aura becomes more powerful, and like certain other higher
Mm,
faculties of the psyche turn on a lot more easily. But
hmm
as you get higher in the psyche, as you know, and as many of our audience knows, like the imbalances become more accentuated. So if you're imbalanced and you're going higher and higher, it starts getting really
mm,
rocky. And that's where I
hmm
found it right now. I'm like, well, I've got to fix something, but like I don't quite know what. So
Yeah, well, I guess I'm not quite as black and white as you in terms of I don't believe in no masturbation. That's what you said, right? You're not supposed to
yeah, okay.
masturbate.
So like tell me about that because like NoFap is a
Yeah.
really popular movement on the internet, and a lot of
hmm
men in particular, but also women get a lot of
hmm
benefits. But you've
hmm
perhaps got another side of this, just you to
Yeah,
say.
so the thing with porn is I think again, I'm not black and white and I think that it's so easily accessible. It's easy for that to become addictive. I'm not going to say, in the same way that we're all addicts as far as I'm concerned. For some of us, we could be, addicts to our spiritual practices, right? So whatever we might be using to avoid like being here now in our bodies. I mean, my type of spirituality is very embodied. There's a reason we're in bodies. There's a reason we're human. So I want to really like dive deeper into that. Like the spiritual realms come somewhat naturally to me, but I have to be grounded to be able to feel comfortable with the spiritual realms in a way. So
Well, that's a very
um
Western approach, I think, and I want to say that like people tend to undermine that because they're coming
mm,
at it the Eastern way, where it's like, look, exit the body and go back to heaven. It's like, no, like
yeah.
bringing heaven to earth is a totally valid way of doing spirituality.
Yeah, I think that's spiritual bypass, frankly. At least a lot of the people, maybe in different cultures where that's been a tradition for many years, right? I remember a long time ago hearing that if you're going to pursue a spiritual tradition, find the one that was in your lineage. That's the
Damn
one that you're going to,
straight.
yeah,
Yes. And honestly,
exactly.
like as just if people are interested in doing your own spiritual thing, like when I really got on the Western horse, really
Yeah,
started that with Carl Jung properly. Like
mm,
it made so much more sense and I made so much
that's right.
faster progress because it's my own psyche is anchored into those symbols.
Yeah, yeah. And your DNA from your ancestors as well, right? So
Exactly.
however far back that might go. So, so in terms of um porn, it can be pretty addictive to a lot of people. However, watching porn from time to time, I don't have a problem if people want to do that, and I certainly don't have a problem with people giving their bodies pleasure. So there's a big difference between the way most people masturbate and giving your body pleasure, exploring your body in a pleasurable way. So masturbation is the way people normally achieve orgasm, right? Or the goal, I should say, is orgasm.
Yeah.
That's typically, it's the fastest route to orgasm. Whatever's going to get me there the fastest. So it really doesn't encompass much pleasure. I mean, there's, the expression rub one out. I mean, how much pleasure does that sound like it entails,
It
right?
sounds awful.
Yeah, I know, right? So it really like, but it depicts this kind of, you know, horse galloping back to the barn. And, so the thing is like learning how to bring more pleasure, more connection to the pleasure in your body, I think is really important. So if we can explore the touch of that we can give our own bodies and explore the ways that our body responds to different touches, I think that's actually a really huge benefit because it's in a way easier to decipher what we like and what arouses us and what gives us pleasure. Um, Whereas if we're together with two people or, even more, then it's kind of hard to distinguish sometimes really specifically what our body likes and doesn't like. It's all kind of, mixed up.
Okay, so what I'm getting is like sort of like the benefit of it, perhaps, is
Mm,
like it's an exploration of what you like and what you don't like, of your emotional world. You're legitimately exploring that, and that has
hmm
benefits.
Absolutely. I mean, uh, pleasure is first of all would be the primary objective,
Hmm.
which is very different than the other, where it's orgasm is the primary objective.
And
So
different,
it's,
sorry to
yeah,
cut in, but different to the model that I outlined beginning, where it's like you sublimate all that sexual energy and then you grow out, but it's this pleasure doesn't really factor in that. It's too stoic, perhaps.
that's right, exactly. So I've heard, and I can't cite anybody, but I've heard that we have a pleasure receptor in every cell of our body. And the bottom line is that pleasure is something that is overlooked for most people in terms of well-being,
Mm.
right? So if you think of when babies, when babies come into the world and, let's just say toddler age, kids are still really living in a natural state. They're totally sensual. And again, sensuality doesn't mean sexuality. These are two separate things.
Okay, maybe
So,
explain those two terms for everyone.
well, so sensuality literally has to do with the senses, deriving pleasure from the senses. It could be looking at something beautiful. It could be touching the skin or stroking a soft blanket, right? Even squishing mud between the toes. So it's just deriving pleasure from the senses, the taste, the sound, playing
Mm.
music, right? So that's literally sensuality. Now, can we experience sensuality when we're having sex? We can, but we don't always,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So the fact is that we are wired to experience pleasure and to seek it. However, most places around the world teach us that pleasure is either superfluous, luxurious, something that's a luxury and, rarely to be, oh, I'll get a massage like, every 6 months or something like that, or even sinful.
Yeah,
So
like
pleasure's gotten a really bad rap. The thing is that, you know, when we're not connected to our bodies like we are in like throughout the world, most people are not very connected to their bodies, right? Again, so
mm.
you're talking about that stoic. It's like, oh, I'm going to override this. I'm going to
Mm.
override this hunger. I'm going to override this thirst and this fatigue and so on, right?
And let's
Including,
validate that because like that's a really important part of our psyches that is very well developed, particularly for men. But what's interesting in this conversation is like, hang on a minute, look at what pleasure is, look at what it does. And then what's getting me curious now is like, well, there must be this whole psycho-spiritual reality to pleasure that's not being cultivated. And what I'm getting is like, well, if I even like looking at porn and masturbation and stuff like that, which is addictive and can be extremely dangerous and degenerative. But what you're saying is like, no, like if you explore that sensuality, there's something very spiritual and very important that can be developed there.
I mean, absolutely. Why were we wired for it?
Well, exactly. It's a part of our psyche. What's it doing?
Ab it's here to nourish us. It's
Okay,
here to
how does
nourish
it
us.
nourish us?
I grew up in Tunisia. And when I grew up in Tunisia, um, frankly, it was a very slow pace of life. And there was something so nourishing that was vastly different from this fast-paced life that, most of us live today, where we really like were would sit and taste food and look at the views, and people would play instruments and dance. And I mean, it it brought about a sense of well-being, right? And that's the role of pleasure that I'm talking about. So I'm not saying, oh, I'm just going to give up, work and just sit around and pleasure myself. I'm talking about capturing moments in the day. I'll just give you some examples, and these are so basic and so simple that it's hard to imagine how powerful this is. But I would find myself getting in and out of the shower as if I was, doing a job. Like I would just get in, be thinking about my day, very utilitarian. And I have a view of the Red Rocks here in Sedona from my shower. I wasn't even looking at it. Was I feeling the water on my body? Not even. And so that's a conscious choice now is when I get in the shower, I look at the Red Rocks, I smell the scent of the essential oils that are in the conditioner. And I mean, I'm literally feeling the water. Sometimes people joke when I share this with them. It's like, well, gosh, I wouldn't want to pay your water bill. It's not about the length of time. It's just about the consciousness.
No, I get it. You're
So
directing your egoic awareness into the sensuality of it, the taste, the sounds, the feeling. Yeah, like I get it.
bringing you into the now. You're
Mm.
bringing it's like I call it sensual mindfulness.
But it occurs to me it's not merely bringing you into that. Yes, you're experiencing it now. But what I'm getting from this, it's you're experiencing a type of your psyche, the sensual, emotional bit, and that's
Mm,
being explored. Rather, like I
mhm.
could think about like a Sudoku problem right now and be really present while I'm doing it. But that's
Mm,
not the sensuality. That's this sort of
that's
like
right.
focused laser part of the intellect. which I'm very
That's right.
present with. So, so,
Hmm.
so what I'm curious about now is like, what happens as you grow that sensual part of your psyche?
More aliveness. I mean, in one word, more aliveness, right?
That's really good.
So when we and it's interesting because the more I go down this road of exploring intimacy, it's you know, it's almost like a sense of arousal, right? So sex is so compartmentalized. Sexual energy is so compartmentalized in our culture that the thought of maybe feeling almost like arousal in the shower like that would be weird, but it's actually just when we stop pinning our sexual energy on something outside of ourselves and just experience it in the moment as pleasure, as aliveness, as vitality, right? Because I mean, let's face it, if we're having great sex on a regular basis, we look better, we feel better, we're more charismatic, and that could be
Mm.
sex with ourselves, by the way. It doesn't have to be with somebody else.
So you think
um
people can do that with masturbation?
yes, I do.
Okay, fascinating.
Hmm. Yeah. If they're doing it in the way that, I'm describing, where they're like, I mean, kind of corny, but, to use the word lovemaking, right?
No, I
As
get it.
opposed to just rubbing one out, right?
Being
So
sensual,
being
exercising
sensual,
the sensual aspect of your psyche
that's
as a
right.
practice.
That's right. And it also brings about more self-love to the body, whether consciously or unconsciously, because so many people hate their bodies, right? And when we experience pleasure in our body, how could we hate it?
Mm, mm, mm.
So it brings in this deeper, more loving connection to the body because the body is experiencing pleasure. Where else are you going to feel pleasure? Only in the body.
Okay. It's really good. I'm not just saying this to like be flattering to you, but you're connecting a lot of dots for me personally, and I'm
Oh,
finding this
good.
very interesting. So thank you, and I know our audience will be too.
Great. I'm happy for that.
Okay, so before we swap topics, because this is very
Yeah.
good. Like, so people are like, right, okay, I want to be more sensual. She's selling it to me. I know there's some mystery here that's really good. How do I do that?
Well, small ways, right? So you could go book a massage, but just start to think. What I tell people, my clients a lot of times is put the word pleasure somewhere where you see it all the time, like a bathroom mirror, to remind yourself, oh, because most people are spending 0 to 10% of their day actually experiencing any pleasure in their body.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's because I've asked every client, like, so what percentage? And it's between 0 and 10%. So, you know, I'm not kidding when I say this contributes to well-being. People feel happier, they feel more relaxed. It affects the nervous system. So I mentioned the shower. Just start to think of ways that you can encompass. It's basically literally and metaphorically stopping and smelling the roses. So the other thing that I do in the morning, I have my coffee ritual and I make it to, it's perfect. I have to, everything about the coffee is perfect, right? And I make a point to not bring my phone with me. So
Mm.
I sit, I savor each sip. I'm watching my dogs, I'm looking out the window or sitting outside and hearing the birds. So it's all going on and I'm literally savoring it. It's a very conscious decision to savor.
Yeah, you're explaining this very beautifully. And so what's occurring to me is as I'm listening to this, is I'm thinking, okay, if there's this whole plane of my psyche here that
Mm.
that Gwen's like exploring and showing us how to open up, like it's not merely going to be locked into that. There's going to be this massive chain of events all the way through the inner planes. And you said like, well, look, people look better, they've got better vitality, better charisma, but it's not going to be merely limited to that. There'll be this whole knock-on effect. And now I'm curious. I'm like, well, what else does it knock onto if you unlock that part of the psyche, you know?
I mean, that's why I wanted to get into it coaching because it relates to everything. Again, it's like, we're not these separate compartmentalized beings where this is our work and this is our sex life and that's way over there in the corner. And this, it's all one, right? I remember I had a business coach one time and I said, I want to shift something about my business. And she said, well, it's not really shifting anything about your business. It's shifting something within you because you are that, right? It is you. And it was kind of a startling moment for me. It's the same thing with sexuality. So I have, some clients that are saying that they really want to explore that part of themselves, but
Mm.
they can't even realize the magnitude if they stay with it as they, as we work at unraveling all the conditioning and programming of their lives, of their own childhood experiences, the imprinting, their adult experiences, the cultural conditioning. They cannot in that moment even understand the magnitude of how this affects every part of their lives
No, I get it.
themselves.
I get it. I get it. And like one of the ways I think you can navigate this very difficult time, the end of the age of Pisces, is you look at where's the trauma, where's the Overton window, where is the system telling you like you can't do this? And
Mm.
basically every single time, like 100 times out of 100, do the opposite. And this thing fits that model. Well, it doesn't just fit it perfectly. It seems like this is one of the ones where they put quite a lot of effort into,
Yeah.
haven't they? They really don't want you feeling
Yes.
pleasure.
That's right. That's exactly right. So basically, when we're in touch with our own pleasure and giving ourselves permission to experience the pleasure in our body, and it not only uplifts us, but it's a reclamation. We're meant to feel pleasure. We're
Mm,
meant to feel alive, right?
mm.
We're not meant to be robots, like disconnected from our bodies and going through life all stressed out. This is a reclamation in a way of our life force energy that is free. Right. So I
Yeah.
think, what you were saying before about this is definitely we've been turned away. Remember, pleasure's sinful, right? That this is a powerful reclamation, not only of our bodies, our pleasure, our life force energy, but who we are capable of being in the world.
Yeah, this makes so much sense to me. And again, as you're talking, I'm thinking like, all right, I get this. I get this as a part of my psyche. I get that we should all develop it. And now I'm curious because what will happen when it gets developed and the other stuff? And I guess I'm going to spend the next few years finding out now.
Yeah, yeah, let me know. But I do want to say, it related to that with regard to porn, this last piece around porn is that porn isn't revealing that side, right? For the most part, porn is more mechanical. And of course, it's not real sex. I mean,
And it's
unless you're playing.
intellectual. Sorry to cut in, but it's
Yeah,
it's it's
yeah.
intellectually driven, right? You're not really
Hmm.
being very sensual with it, are you?
Not at all. For the
Yeah.
most part, not at all.
Mm.
So it's just, it's kind of a poor education and kind of leading us away from what I'm talking about.
So building on what you're saying then, is it the case that if you find a way to be sensual with the porn, not so
Hmm.
abstract with it, then perhaps there might be some sort of growth curve there.
Yeah. Yeah, you could watch some porn and play around with different touches to yourself, and so you could incorporate that. But I think if you watch too much of it, you're likely to get sucked back into the mental aspect of it again.
Yeah, you do, and there are definite dangers of porn, and it is very destructive to people a lot of the time, and it's something that like the cabal pushes as well. So like I'm not
Hmm.
undermining what Gwen's saying here because I think she's onto something really important. I am saying be very bloody careful with it because there are these legitimate bad sides as well, and it obviously requires a lot of nuance and wisdom to handle well.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, let's dive into breath work because this is
Okay.
something that I've added to my own spiritual practice in the last like year or so. Very powerful, very good stuff. What is breath work and what's going on when you do it?
Well, I mean, I do a very specific, even though I'm a Kundalini yoga teacher, so I know a lot of different types of breath practices, but primarily as a breathwork facilitator, I'm teaching people a conscious connected breath through the open mouth typically, um, as a way of journeying within. So
Okay, so
breath
to
is
be
a,
clear, so
yeah,
is this one where you're doing really deep breaths and you're getting into like a shamanic kind of state, or is it
yes,
okay? That brilliant. Yeah, that's the one I'm
yeah.
doing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I typically use music as well, and to help facilitate what the music does is it helps bring things up to the surface. The way that I look at breath work is another pathway of intimacy,
Yeah.
because the way that I see it, honestly, I've called it at different times a practice of self-love,
Mm.
in that we get to meet ourselves however we're showing up in the moment and learn how to be in unconditional presence with ourselves. That's to me self-love.
Okay. All right. So like maybe if I'll tell you a couple of experiences I had and you can
Yeah.
unpack that for me and tell me what's happening. So I'm
Yeah,
doing it
yeah.
with my breathwork coach and it's something I actually really recommend like people check out if you're interested in personal development. And like after like 20, 30 minutes, like I'm in this definitely in an altered state. It's like I've taken a lot of
Mm,
psychedelics or something like that. And then I'm
hmm
writhing around, like spitting stuff out, having this like exorcist, like kind of like groaning and weird things and like almost like involuntary body movements. And then afterwards, like, I mean, it's different every time, but like I have these like really deep spiritual experiences when these like archetypal images come through, and there's this
mm,
really intense feeling of, not intense, just deep feeling of peace. And then all these
mm,
weird things shift in the next few days. So what do you
hmm
think's going on there, Gwen?
Well, in a way, I call it like an inner decluttering so that we
Mm,
can access our essential self, right? The one that is really tapped into archetypal knowing information that is more able to be present with our emotions, the deep peace that resides within each and every one of us, that is able to tap us into that innate connection to our bodies. And consciousness knows where to go. So we're really opening to consciousness. When we breathe consciously, we are conscious. There's no mistake that every religion around the world talks about the relationship between the mysterious relationship between breath and spirit. Every
mm,
single religion speaks to that, right?
mm,
So it's a connector on all levels.
yeah.
Right. But I say inner decluttering because I mean, I've been teaching about emotions and how not to suppress them and how to be more aligned and authentic and for years and years and years. Do I still suppress emotions unconsciously throughout my week? Yes, I do.
Mm,
So um, when I get on the mat, I have an opportunity to literally just release whatever I may have held in. And that could be physical movement as well. So, we've all at times in our lives stifled a physical movement. And maybe that was to run away. Maybe that was to hit or kick somebody. Maybe that was to jump for joy. So we have a lot of suppressed motion as well, which can account for sometimes the movement. In fact, I always encourage people to try to move vigorously at least once through their journey, just to see, and it'll inevitably feel like a release. And it might be the only time that people feel the need to do that. Other times people will be moving a lot, like you said, in an almost involuntary way, but I do give them the technique that I call the tantrum, where I have them once pound their fists and kick their heels. And they don't need to be angry. Um, they just do it once to be able to feel what a release that is,
yeah.
because inevitably that will release, and it could be fear, it could be anger, it could be again a desire to jump out of the seat in the classroom and run around the classroom in glee, right? So how much of that has been stuck in the body? A lot, let me tell you.
I love all this new age stuff. I really do. Like I love it.
Is that new age, really?
Well, I think there's something about the Aquarian age which yields an eclectic approach to spirituality, where you're doing your
Mm.
psychedelics one weekend and your breath work and your sacred site visit. And I like that. I like that my life is involved with all this screaming around,
Yes,
having a tantrum, doing breath work. I just think it's
yes.
really cool.
It is really cool. It is really cool.
Yeah.
And it's freeing. It's amazing also when you get a whole room full of people doing it. I mean, that the energy is through the charts. And but the thing is, I don't have people scream. So
Mm.
some breath workers are big on screaming, and I don't, because I feel like sometimes people can get violent with themselves when they're screaming, and they can end up meaning that they're pushing. They're
Yeah.
pushing the expression. So I actually encourage my clients to make more of a toning sound where they're just allowing the vibration of their voice to come out, which can be equally releasing, but in a way that feels safe in the body.
Yeah, those
And
are such good points. Yeah,
mhm,
sorry, what were you saying?
because sometimes people can even feel performative in certain types of breath work where they go in thinking like, oh my God, I'm gonna have, if I don't scream and yell, then it wasn't a good breath work.
Well, I could see that, but I find that kind of hard because it's really, well, at least the one I did is really quite intense. And it's like
Hmm
I would find it quite hard to be pompous with that, just because it's so hard to keep that rhythm going.
Yeah.
But you know what it felt like to me, Gwen, because I do a lot of different cleansing. And it
Mm,
felt like what this one did is pushed a ton of energy through the etheric and at least part of the astral body and just cleared
hmm
through all that. What do you
That's
reckon?
exactly right. Absolutely. That's why I call it a decluttering. I mean, you can say
Mm.
detoxing, but it's a detox on all levels because, the body detoxes, oh, obviously I'm preaching to the choir here, 70% through the breath.
Mm.
And most people are barely breathing. And specifically the part of the breath that they're holding is the exhale. That's what most people don't know, is when people find themselves holding their breath, they're actually not exhaling. Do you want to know why?
Yes, I do.
Okay, it's because it's expression. The exhale is when we let things out. And because we've all been taught to contain, restrict our expression through the socialization process, don't cry, don't sing, don't dance, don't laugh, don't touch
Mm.
that, don't wear that,
Mm.
don't be that, don't say that, don't feel that, right? So we learn to constrict and retract, if you will. And that incorporates, that's one of the suppressive mechanisms that we use is to hold the
Yeah.
exhale.
Yeah.
So that's the detox system. So people are not detoxing,
Yeah, I
FYI.
get that. I get that.
Hmm.
So okay, so like there's obviously something very profound going on with it. What do you see that happens after people take this kind of breath work thing?
That's a great question because this kind of came to me accidentally in a way, or maybe it was divinely orchestrated. Um, I had um, I had been doing my own practice for many, many years, but a lot of the clients that I see are, they're one-off, or they maybe come a couple of times or occasionally, because I'm very much about empowering people to do their own breathwork journeys,
Yeah.
right? If they feel comfortable doing that. It's not for everybody, but for a lot of people, they are comfortable doing that.
Well,
Go
to
ahead.
be to be clear, like I totally you can, right? But like for me,
Yes.
at least where I am, about a year or two into this, like I find it's
Hmm.
much easier to have a practitioner. The one I use like puts
Absolutely.
these pressure points on, so there's this extra layer doing it. But I feel
Mm.
like when it's because it is quite hard. And like
Hmm.
when I'm doing something like that, or like a Kambo ceremony, for example, where like I don't know if you're familiar with Kambo.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay,
I
like
haven't.
I
Yeah.
would never do that by myself because like I
Yeah.
want someone to say, right, sit up straight, drink more water, like, and it's like that with the breath work. Like I want to. It's so hard that I want someone just to make sure that I'm doing it right. And I think I would slack, and I wouldn't get quite as much out of it if I did it by myself.
Yes. I mean, I personally prefer to be facilitated as well. And I've been doing breath work
Okay.
for,
Yeah.
35 years.
Yeah.
So I prefer it. There have been many times I've done it on my own and had incredible experiences though. And not everybody either has the finances or for whatever reason, they don't want to, come back continuously. But I had this group of women come to me and they said, it was they would meet and do spiritual work together. And so they came to me and they said, we want to try a breathwork ceremony with you. So they came and they did it and they loved it. And they said, we want to do this every week for a month. So we did it for a month. And then they said, we're not stopping. We want to keep going. So they ended up doing breathwork with me for an entire year, every single week. And then some people moved on to other things. Some people stayed with me and did breathwork with me almost every week for 3 years because that inspired me by what I saw to facilitate a weekly breathwork ceremony here in Sedona. What what was it that I saw? What I saw was that through the consistent deepening into oneself on a weekly basis, these women were becoming, and eventually it was more than just women. It was, the clients that did it regularly were simply living more from the inside out. So,
Mm.
I mean, it takes time, but organically, just that consistent feeling of being, in the body, connected to the spiritual aspect of their being, whatever their experience was. But, and every time, as you said, it's totally different, right?
Yeah.
So it's like getting to know ourselves in the deepest way possible.
Yeah.
So it's not even a doing afterwards, although I do encourage my breathwork clients to work with the medicine of the journey. It's more just the consistent touching in upon ourselves in such a profound way, because most of our lives are spent looking out here.
Yeah, well said. And I think you've done a really good job of like showing people some of the benefits. And I recognize what you're saying with my own thing. So obviously Glenn's website will be in the sorry, not Glenn, Gwen, beg your pardon. I almost called you
That's
Glenn.
okay. It's
Yeah,
not the
like
first time.
Gwen's website will be in the description. But if you want a UK one, I'll put my guy in the UK as well, like for people that are closer to here.
Hmm. And I do actually do a free online ceremony the first Sunday of every month. So that's this coming Sunday, December
Okay,
4th.
so you can
Yes.
get like 70 or 80% maybe of the benefit if you don't have the budget, but you want to do this work as well, like
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, do we
Yeah.
have time for one more topic?
Absolutely. Why not?
Okay, let's talk about hypnosis.
Oh gosh. Well, the problem with that is that I'm not really, I was trained a long time ago and I used my hypnotherapy background primarily, well, not primarily, well, yes, primarily in breath work for the languaging. I did not enjoy being a hypnotherapist, sorry.
Really? That's interesting. Why didn't you like being a hypnotherapist?
Because I'm biased towards the breath work, and I'll tell you why. Because when I'm facilitating breath work, people can have these incredibly profound healing moments where a memory comes up, an insight comes in, and it's in the right timing for them.
Mm.
Meaning that as a hypnotherapist, I could sometimes see, oh, this is where that person needs to go and have an agenda that I'm going to take them there. But maybe on some level, they're not quite ready,
Well,
right? And
it's the
and so then they can't be inducted and then they find they blame themselves.
Okay, great point. So this reminds me of like the intellect falling in love with its own creations, and you get this brilliant
Mm,
idea, you put this
yeah.
form in there, but it's like it's not in symphony with this whole other like greater reality. And what you're saying is
Hmm.
the advantage of breath work is, as you said, the psyche knows, so it will tend to find that rhythm a little better.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, as a breathwork facilitator, I think of myself more as an educator and somebody who is holding space. And of course, I will coach the client and use touch like your facilitator, but really, truly, I have the utmost respect that this experience overall is between the client and the breath.
I get that.
That's first and foremost. And get to witness that, which is
Yeah.
incredible.
But
So
you could do some pretty cool things with hypnosis. I wonder if you've ever had any experiences like that.
yeah, I mean, I did an incredible, I have experienced some profound healing through hypnotherapy, but it's been a long, long time, to be honest.
Okay.
And I did do a past life regression that was amazing,
Okay,
really
okay, come
amazing.
on. You got to share that.
Well, I've done a couple of past life regressions, but this one in particular, this is somebody named Michael Brown who lives in town, or at least he used to. And I think he's now pulled back from doing this and has written a book. But it was fascinating because I got to, and can I be really honest, Richard? I don't know that I even believe in past lives, to be perfectly honest. I
Okay.
don't know if they're past lives or if it's my ancestors' DNA that's coming through. And it doesn't matter to me. I don't really care.
Well, having sort of intellectually gone through this and having
Hmm.
had one extremely compelling past life experience of my own,
Mm,
I'm inclined to believe that the evidence is close to overwhelming about the veracity of past life. Like having many lives, and also like
yeah,
like it's the foundation of Western occultism as well. The whole idea is like, look, you're a soul. You got all these different things to learn. You ain't doing that in one life or even two. There's a lot of lessons to
right.
learn there. There's this
And
really cool.
energy
Yeah, go
and
on.
energy doesn't die.
And energy doesn't die. Yes. So and
Hmm.
also like it's not past lives, but it's like it's near death experiences as well, which like again overwhelming evidence for that of like these people
Yes.
going through this tunnel of light and there's this continuation there, and that fits pretty
Hmm.
neatly with the past life thing.
Hmm.
There was
Hmm.
this guy the guy's name I think is Woolager. He wrote this really good book called Other Lives, Other Cells, and he was a hypnotherapist and a Jungian
Hmm.
analyst. You know that one?
Mm. The title sounds familiar. Yeah.
You probably
Hmm.
read it. Like it's quite a well-known book. So if you want to go deep in the
Mm.
rabbit hole on like hypnosis and past life, like that's a really, really good
Yeah.
book to look into. But what he found is like you get these like rhythms of like lessons being learned when you're like the abuser one life, and then you're the
Hmm.
abused the next life, and then you're the savior the next one. Like there's this
Hmm.
pattern,
Yeah.
this narrative, or like a meta narrative that emerges. And I tell you, like I had one time where I broke through, and it was like it wasn't just vague. It was like 10 out of 10 as clear as this, like just perfectly clear. And it made so much sense about how this trauma I was experiencing in this particular life, in a whole different time, whole different body, everything linked to
Mm.
like these challenges and sort of opportunities I was given in this life.
Hmm.
Yeah, I wonder if you have any experience with that type of stuff.
So what I got to experience from the two past lives that I went through in that particular session, I got to kind of experience less of some of the trauma. Do you want me to just run through one really
Yeah, yeah,
briefly?
1,000,000%.
This was a number of years ago, and it's still vivid for me. So, and I've always felt a connection with the Maasai. When I was 5, we went and visited Kenya, and my brothers wanted to trade me for 5 cows with the Maasai tribe that we came across, and that I don't know. For some reason, though, in breathwork, they come through as a connection for me.
Mm,
And so, in this lifetime, I was Maasai, and I was a young boy, and I think my mother was my family members were in it, but it's various members of the tribe, and I was at the time where I had to do the initiation to become a man. And I had this incredibly profound love for animals.
mm,
And so I went and I performed this initiation of killing an animal, and I couldn't bear it.
mm,
I could not bear it. And so I laid myself down on the ground, and I remember feeling the kind of parched ground and just let myself die. And when I died, then I can feel it and see it right now. There was that sense of oneness that just was like a lightning through me, where just total oneness.
mm.
So the trauma that if there was any well, I guess there was some trauma, is that I didn't really connect with my parents, and I was a very sensitive soul, and I didn't really connect with humans as much as I connected with the animals in that, right? And there is a part of that that's very much I'm very connected to animals. I feel oneness is just something that I just have felt my whole life, but just without any spiritual concept to it. So for me, this was just such a, a deep understanding of the Genesis in a way.
Well, thank you for sharing. And not only is this just a really cool story, which opens up all these profound metaphysical like questions and
Mm,
implications, which it does,
mm,
but it fits our map for dealing with the end of the age of Pisces. It's
mm,
woo. People feel normies feel awkward talking about it, and it's like, oh, that's a bit weird. And that always means that like there's something good there, and it is. I
mhm,
think what it really, when you really get into this past life thing and near death experience, it gives context on so many other things that we're challenged to do here, particularly the spiritual stuff, which is the most effective stuff I've ever learned, and perhaps Gwen would agree with me there, which is why it's one of the biggest prohibitions the Cabal has of all of
mm,
them.
mhm. Yeah. I think, if what you're saying is that it did give me more permission to acknowledge that oneness and to claim it and to just totally accept it, right?
Yeah.
Because this was a number of years ago. So yeah, that was one of my experiences.
Well, thank you for sharing. Okay, like final point then. So I would
Yes.
love to know more about Sedona because I understand that
Oh,
it's come up before, and I understand there's some pretty cool sacred sites and mystical
mhm.
things there. So just tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
Well, it's breathtakingly beautiful with the red rocks, and no matter which direction you come in, all of a sudden, in the midst of kind of the browns, you just see this red, and it's like glowing.
Right.
So it's just intoxicatingly beautiful. And those of us that have lived here a long time, I've lived here 15 years, which is the longest I've ever lived anywhere. Um, it never ceases to amaze us. No matter where you live in town, there are like just a slew of incredible hiking trails to just walk down the street and take. It attracts definitely people of spiritual ilk. People are interested in this nature of life and beingness and so on. And yet there are also a lot of people that just kind of come through to gawk, get a psychic reading, stare at us. No.
So it's obviously a place of extremely high natural energy, and there's going to be a lot of like
Yes.
nodes or vortexes there. Like
Hmm.
those places tend to get a lot of UFOs and things like that. Do you ever get UFOs in
Oh,
Sedona?
yes, definitely. I mean, don't ask me too much about that because that's not kind of a rabbit hole I've gone down much myself. I can see your eyes getting so big, but
It's
you should just come
fascinating.
visit. You should come visit and try to see it for yourself because
Well, I will. If
yes,
you come here
yes,
in the summer, Grant, I'll show you the
yes.
crop circles. Like
Oh, I'd
90% of the
love.
crop circles are just like about 10 miles east of here. They are
Wow.
mental.
Wow.
Mm,
That's amazing. I'd love to see that. Yeah.
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 So you ever
So
seen any UFOs in Sedona?
People see them all the time. Have I? Not really. I have to confess, I go to bed really early too, because I get up really early. Sorry to be so boring.
No, Gwen, listen, this has been a fascinating conversation, and the
Uh,
insights that you've given me and my audience, like, they're truly valuable. It's not often you get a conversation where multiple doors in your psyche get opened up, and
mm,
I've had that just from you interviewing Gwen just now, and I'm sure many people listening have had it. So thank you for sharing those gifts. They are
thank
valuable.
you. Thank you so much, Richard. It's been such a pleasure to be here with you and go back and forth sharing passion.
Ah, it was fun. It was fun. It was
Yeah,
passionate. It was a little bit
yeah.
sensual. Gwen, Gwen, if people want to know more about your stuff and they want to follow up with any of this stuff, like
Yeah.
how could they do that?
The best way is to go to my website, Inspired Sedona,
It's about something.
and yeah, and to schedule either a discovery call or just to reach out, send me an email, just to contact me. My Instagram was hacked. I do have a Facebook page, Inspired Sedona, but the best way is to go to my website.
Great
Yeah,
stuff. Gwen,
yeah.
you got great energy and you're a wise
Thank you.
lady. Thank you very
Oh,
much for sharing your time.
thank you. Yeah. Take care. Bye.